Throughout the history of charter schools in Massachusetts, the Pioneer Institute has been a strong supporter, and joining us with some thoughts around the question of charter school expansion is our guest from the Institute, the Executive Director, Jim Stergios. Thank you very much for being with us,
Jim. It's good
Jim.
to be with you.
Jim, I want to start with the money concerns, because you know in Boston here, we had all these cuts, and then the money restored, and the other money that was cut back in Boston public schools. So a lot of people out there are thinking, charter school expansion, isn't that going to be more of a problem for the district schools?
Well, you know, the first thing to note is that if you take a look at year-to-year increases in the Boston public school, the district school budget, it has gone up year after year. And in part that's because the city of Boston has stepped into the fray and said, if the state's going to contribute a little bit less, we will pick up more. So they've actually been held more than harmless. They've seen their budgets increase. Their large challenge is that the district school system has been unwilling to change. And what I mean by that is we have over 90,000 seats in the Boston public schools. We have 55,000 students. We are maintaining almost 40,000 seats that are empty in those schools. And that has an impact in terms of maintaining buildings, maintaining staff. We have hundreds of people working in the central office. And they've not drawn lessons even from places like Lawrence. The Lawrence Public Schools have had a wonderful leader in Jeff Riley, who has done some amazing things there in terms of turning around their performance and increasing performance there. But some of the things he's done is just basic common sense. He said, why don't I make sure I put as much money into the schools, not into the central office? And so he's reduced his headcount in the central office by about 30% and put that money back out in the schools. You don't hear that conversation in the Boston public school system. To put that at the feet of the charter schools, I find more than discomforting, it's illogical. The fact is that the city of Boston does get reimbursements for every child that leaves the district schools to go to a charter school. It goes over 6 years, it's about 225% of a tuition amount for that student, even though the student's not there, and they have 6 years to make that transition. Chris, the fact is, if you take a look at Washington, D.C., there is no reimbursement formula whatsoever. And what that forces the district schools in Washington, D.C. to do is to try and change their way of doing business. By providing a reimbursement, which is fairly generous, probably among the most generous in the country, you could make the argument that we've actually shielded the Boston public schools from having to make some decisions along the way like, hey, wait a minute, maybe we have tens of thousands of empty seats. Maybe we should do something about that and put the money into actual kids in learning.
Chris, the other thing that has also been coming up is the degree to which charter schools can take on the at-risk students and not push them out through suspensions or other means. There does seem to be something of a gap between the charters and the district schools in this line.
Statewide, the charter schools on English language learners and special needs kids are very much aligned. In fact, they have a greater percentage of English language learners than they serve than the state does statewide. That said, point taken, because a lot of the charters are located in urban districts and they don't serve as many English language learners or special needs kids in Boston, let's say, as the Boston public schools do. What I would say is since 2010, there was a law that increased the cap in charter schools. And the law said, you need to pay more attention to these two populations and get your game up. And they've done a fabulous job. They're not at the level of the Boston public schools, but they are getting closer and closer every single year. One other point I'd make is this. I hear an awful lot from the teachers' unions, Mass Teachers Association in particular. Charter schools, there are lots of kids there's lots of attrition, they go back to the public schools. It is absolutely false. I would rather than the MTA, the Mass Teachers Association, I will trust MIT on this, which did a recent study on this and said there's no more attrition in the charter schools, the public charter schools, than there are in the public district schools. In fact, in some areas there's lower. If you look at the numbers, the average number of charter school students that have left charter schools to go back to district schools, which includes some SPED, some special needs, some English language learners, and others, just kids who decide that's not a good fit for them. It's a total of 82 a year. That's about 3 students per charter school. Now, if the district schools want to make the argument, this is an undue burden on us, this is impacting us adversely in the sense that it's reducing our performance, and that's why we're not performing as well as the charters. Good luck with that argument. Statistically, it's just not possible.
What about the suspensions? In at least some charter schools, I understand they're fairly high.
Yep.
What about that?
Well, again, I think suspensions versus attrition are two interesting things to talk about together, right? If there are in-school suspensions and they're high because charter schools have a behavioral code that is calling for a certain type of behavior that will be conducive to learning, something that would cut these kids off from the sometimes very harsh realities that they live in, if there's not attrition to go with it, I think it's justifiable to say, we will make sure that behavior is a really important thing for us. If you talk to a school leader, and I've run a school, behavior is the first thing you have to get control of with children. And that is simply because you want them to all walk in tandem toward a goal and set a goal that they can achieve. If there's abuses there, we should investigate them. If there are abuses there, we should go after the people who are doing them and punish them. We've seen around the country, there are some charter schools that do push kids out. I have not seen the evidence that that is actually happening here.
I can see how you don't want to take away autonomy from the school. You don't want to discourage parents from sending their kids to a school like this. But on the other hand, do we need maybe a different body to oversee things?
We do have a charter school office that's run by the state, and they authorize charter schools. They put them on probation when they find problems, let's say a financial problem, or let's say suspensions that are too high. They can call them in, they can put a school on probation. Within a couple of years, they can close a charter school down. There's real accountability in charter schools. And what I wouldn't want to get lost in all of this barrage of accusations against charter schools, please, folks have to remember, these are among the most powerful schools at closing achievement gaps in the country. That is not an overstatement. That's not Pioneer Institute talking. That's Stanford, that's MIT, that's Harvard, that's Duke University. It's not the Teachers Association, right? I get that. But these are folks who study this stuff day in and day out, and they do apples to apples comparisons. They look at, here's child A who wants to go to a charter school and got in. Here's child B who wanted to get into a charter school but wasn't able to because they didn't have enough seats. In the lottery, they weren't picked. How did the two children do? We know from those studies, apples to apples, that charter schools do a very, very good job at closing the achievement gap, and district schools aren't doing it.
You have a lot of students on the waiting list for these schools. I know there's disputes about the numbers, but either way, you still get quite a lot of students. If things cannot be worked out at the State House, should we go to a referendum on this?
I never like ballot initiatives, and that's simply because we're all grown-ups, and we should sit in a room and come up with a compromise. Ballot initiatives are always really expensive, and they inflame passions. And I'm just a believer, first and foremost, we have to make a God's honest effort at getting to a compromise. We've done it before. It was done when the Education Reform Act was first put into place. It was done again in 1997 on charters, where we increased the cap on charter schools. It was done in 2010 once again. Shame on the legislators if they cannot come to a compromise. And frankly, the Senate bill is not a compromise. It hasn't been able to get the House to say anything nice about it. And the governor's come out and said already, I'm not going to buy into this. So compromise it's not. And frankly, it doesn't guarantee a single one more seat in charter schools. It's got a lot of moratoria type tripwires built into it. So we need to actually roll up our sleeves and actually go back at this, is my view.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Jim Stergios from the Pioneer Institute.